Hello and welcome back. Happy Wednesday, everyone. Today we're going to be doing a read-through of Tinto Talks number 36, which is giving some upcoming mechanics for the upcoming Paradox game, Europa. That is the name of the game. They've been trying to keep it under wraps. They've been lying to us all along, but without further ado, let's jump in. Welcome to this week's Tinto Talks. Please stop trying to guess the name of the game. You no need to guess. It is, in fact, Europa. It's going to land us in trouble when you figure it out. Where is our Happy Wednesday here? St. Dave. Someone fire this gentleman. Except don't. Johan's normally here with the Happy Wednesday. St. Dave must be sad today, but he's St. Dave UK. And this week, I'm going to be delving into cultures and some related mechanics like language. We do get the delve, though, as is tradition. So let's jump into it. Culture. Culture is a tricky topic, you're telling me, because it's so abstract as a concept. But it's also an area of our games that have quite strong opinions about, especially if you're in the Balkans, or have real-world connections to that culture. As such, we would like to appreciate if the discussion... Oh man, this is the anti-racist disclaimer at the front. Please do not advocate for... Yeah, okay. As such, we would appreciate if the discussion of this thread is limited to the mechanics of the culture system as presented here, and direct your specific feedback to the culture setup in the relevant regional Tinto maps where it will be more helpful. Oh, I guess they're not having that big a disclaimer. They had a disclaimer at the start of like the Balkans regional video, which I thought was, kind of amusing and perhaps necessary. So, what is culture? Some people don't have it. Some people, the only culture they have is bacteria. But culture is the culmination of vernacular, music, food identity, ethnicity, and other various hard-to-define ideas. It is something possessed by countries, pops, and characters. It has two main dimensions: culture group and language. So here we have uses the language and is the culture group of Indian. Okay. A fairly typical example of a culture consisting of a language and a culture group. We have cultural opinion, which is going to be, mechanically something that's going to be important. We are expecting at least. For the most part, cultures all consider each other to be neutral, but they can have a natural preference or aversion to specific cultures. This is represented with cultural opinions, which are in ascending order are enemy, negative, frenemy, neutral, positive, and kindred. This mainly gives modifiers in various places, for example, country opinions of each other, or how expensive they are while accepted, or how expensive they are while accepted? Expensive in what way? Is this a slavery mechanic? Okay. Most of these will exist from 1337, but there is diplomatic action to change opinion over time. How expensive they are. Maybe it's how expensive it is to engage in diplomatic actions. Okay. Here we have primary culture for this. We have Catalan, we have accepted Aragonese, Andalusia, and Separati, hopefully I pronounced those correctly, are tolerated, and then Sardinian are not accepted. A list of cultures present inside Aragon with two-way opinions to the primary culture Catalan. Please notice that these opinions are work in progress and might not be final. Of course, we get the work in progress qualification here. For cultural capacity, the cultural capacity represents the number of maximum cultures the country can support or accept. For most countries, it starts quite low, but there are many advances at every age to increase the maximum, as well as various other sources like government reforms and policies. I'm hoping this is yet another mechanic that kind of prevents blobbing out, especially in the early game, and forces you to not go super empire mode in the early game. I think that this is, for a realism perspective, this and control specifically is just very important. But adding on to that, this is another mechanic, especially if your culture can shift and change over time. Each culture costs a different cultural capacity depending on its relative size, opinions, culture groups, and languages. That is so awesome that it is going to have variable size. Really a big fan of kind of how subjects have a variable size that we heard about in the last Tinto talks. Subjects will have a variable size or cost for like diplomatic relation slots based on their size. So it is cool if we have like a very, very small minority, if it costs very little to have them as accepted. Okay. So we have some modifiers here, and of these, we also have, the number which is affecting these modifiers, the cultural cost. And I guess that means that must mean what they meant by cost at the start, not the purchasing of pops or the diplomatic actions. Okay, non-accepted cultures. By default, every culture in the world is non-accepted to you. It is the default state, and at best it means that you ignore them. Non-accepted pops are pretty miserable in your country, but also don't provide any benefits. Okay, tolerated cultures. If you have cultural capacity, you can elevate a culture to a tolerated culture. This will make the pops a little bit more content. Tolerated pops will grow as normal, and they will be a little bit happier. Accepted cultures. You can elevate a culture to further being accepted, at which point they will gain special rights. Even though an accepted culture costs 3 times more capacity than tolerated, it is usually much more desirable as they will give you more levies and sailors. Accepted cultures also count towards whether you can core a province and whether a colonial charter will flip to your ownership. Whether a colonial charter will flip to your ownership. Interesting. Countries whose primary culture is one of your accepted cultures will also see you more favorably. It'll be interesting if you try and intentionally reach a situation where you intentionally are accepting cultures for diplo reasons. I wonder what the conditions are for, like, the Habsburg Empire, if they would have, like, Spanish acceptance and acceptance also for Austria. But let's continue. However, accepted pops cannot be slaves, and you cannot accept a culture with the enemy culture opinion. Makes sense? At which point they would be, of course, a frenemy. Primary culture. At the very top of the pyramid is primary culture, of which each country has exactly one. This is the principal culture of the apparatus of the state, and is favored in many calculations. It is not necessarily the largest culture. You can find several smaller countries where a small elite of nobles or clergy rule over the peasant masses belonging to different cultures. Interesting to kind of think about this through the lens of Victoria III, in this case of the EIC, where nearly the entire country is discriminated against because the primary culture is English. Primary culture is an important gate to a lot of gameplay content, such as advances, unit types, government reforms, and so on. It is impossible to list this all here. Just know that the primary culture you have can often can affect many different parts of the game. I wonder how easy it's going to be to culture swap. You can swap your primary culture with an accepted culture if it fills the requirements, such as if it becomes the dominant culture in your country or it is the culture of your ruler. There's also a game rule for it to be There's also a game rule for it to be of the same culture group. Okay. So we do see there are some requirements. I guess dominant and one of your ruler is not that heavy a requirement. I wonder if you have a royal marriage, though. If you will have dual culture children, that might get overly complicated, and maybe they just take the culture of the father, kind of per the succession rights of the time period. Language. Attached to cultures is the language system, which spread across 3 tiers: dialect, language, or language family. Of the 3, language is the most important and where most of the gameplay takes place. Language families. The largest subdivision languages belong to language families. For example, Arabic belonging to the Semitic. The Indo-European family is split into its subgroups, Germanic and Romance, because otherwise it would just be simply too large. Languages like Basque are isolated and do not exist in a language family. That's lonely on Thanksgiving. This mostly offers a small opinion bonus, and it also slightly minimizes costs for things like culture, acceptance, and market attraction. So here we do see a whole bunch of these. This is going to be so exciting for the people who are super into like languages and this type of development stuff, that they appear to be giving a lot more attention to language here. Shout out to the linguistics boys. What is that over there? Uralic? Okay, interesting. Let us continue. Note work in progress, of course, as it is often. Languages. Every culture has a single language which represents the common vernacular amongst its people. Okay. Languages are often larger groups that are comparable to an EU4 cultural group in size, if anyone has played that game. If anyone has played that game. Look at that. Look at the jokester making jokes. Ye people who are reading through this or watching this without having played EU4. For example, Iceland to Sweden all use variants of the Scandinavian language, while everyone from Vienna to Habsburg will use some variants of the German language. Languages have language power, which is impacted by many sources, such as which countries use it as the court language, common language, and liturgical, sorry. I forgot how to pronounce that, liturgical. It is expressed as a percentage of most of the most powerful language in the world and impacts the intensity bonus you get from it. So let's take a look here. I guess we're not going to see the bonuses that are achieved, but we do see this language power kind of group, and you can try and gain power. And I think that we'll get to trade in just a second. Una he emplo. All right, shout out to Spanish. The dominant language in each language or in each location is shown. We see French, Occitan, Spanish, Italian, German, West Slavic, Baltic, East Slavic, English, etc. Dialects. To add diversity within a language, we add a system of dialects, though we aren't especially set on that nomenclature. Words can be tricky when applied to languages. Nomenclature. They represent vernaculars in Project Caesar, aka Project Teaser, aka Europa, time period, broadly formed in a dialectical continuum, and are an effective way to differentiate with them without weakening them by splitting them into full languages. Okay, that makes sense. Dialects are for pure flavor and have no gameplay effect, for now. Two dialects are considered identical for most purposes, such as opinion bonuses, and they share stats like language power. For example, both Leonese and Castilian, or Castilian, are considered the same Spanish language, and so share the same language power, but have many different character names, location names, and potentially other light flavor too. Okay, fair enough. Here we see a bunch of different Germans, and we see some subdivisions in Spain, which are kind of a lot of the examples that they are providing for us, a map showing various ones. We do see a nice little chart that is kind of letting us know Germanic into English, Scandinavian, German, Frisian, and these are the languages as far as the mechanic goes, and then we have the dialects, which are going to be mostly flavor, not mechanics oriented. Countries have several different ways of interacting with language. Common language. The language of a country is simply the language used by the primary culture. It can't be chosen or changed without affecting the primary culture. Liturgical language. Every country has a liturgical language, which represents the language of the clergy, that the clergy use in their rituals and scriptures. I'm really glad that they have this differentiation because of how the clergy operated in Latin for such a long time period. By extension, what scholars use in their academic works. Apparently, and this is more of a thing like in philosophy background, apparently Latin's actually a really good language for being extremely clear with your sentences. Much more clear than English, as far as I understand, although I don't know Latin. This is kind of why during like a period of transition, there were like a lot of authors that would be able to speak and write in multiple languages, and I think this included Descartes. So Descartes, if I'm not mistaken, was French, but he wrote some of his major works in Latin because he was able to be much more precise with the language. Or this is my memory of how it was, based on attending uni for philosophy. Although this would not be something I would know firsthand because I know neither French nor Latin, and I haven't read the original translation. Some religions allow a country to choose whichever liturgical language they like. For example, Eastern Orthodox countries variously use languages like Greek or Church Slavonic, whereas Catholic and Islamic countries are forced to use a Latin, there we go, and Arabic respectively. I almost said respectfully, but also respectfully. In general, you want to adopt a liturgical language with a high language power as it affects your research speed. That makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. Because if, you are putting in... If Descartes writes meditations in Latin while in France, then that means someone in Spain or Germany or England can all read it because that is kind of the dominant language. Similarly, a lot of... the most significant texts, after the fall of Rome, a lot of the more significant texts were kind of lost to the West and were only in Arabic and then came back to the West. One of the most influential philosophers was actually Aristotle, and, his texts almost only came back to the West after, being effectively rediscovered in Arabic and kind of like retranslated. He was known as the philosopher, and I think St. Augustine leaned on him quite a lot for his writings, and St. Augustine was very prolific. And so I think And I mean, there's like so much like rich stuff that you can think about in terms of language. I think that a big part of why Aristotle's stuff spread so widely initially has to do with he was the teacher of Alexander the Great, and as he conquered, eastward, he spread a whole bunch of ideas, and this is partly why there was so much translation or so much, Aristotle's ideas in Arabic in order to come like kind of back to the West after, the fall of Rome, this type of stuff. But okay, that's like a bit of a side tangent. Also, I think that's partially why Aristotle is like was so prolific. It has more to do with Alexander the Great than necessarily the quality of Aristotle's ideas, although we don't need to drag Aristotle here. Aristotle also had some good ideas too. I'm not saying they're like... Actually, I'm not ripping on Aristotle at all, but just to be clear, I think a big reason that ideas spread has to do with, conquest and language and this type of stuff. So it is exciting to see that probably staying in Latin is going to be beneficial for you, at least before the printing press or something like this, and playing around language is like a super interesting mechanic to me. And it like makes me want to read more about like the spread of languages and this type of stuff, and I think that that's super exciting. Kind of like reading through this, and the secondary thing is market language, right? Which is also going to be exciting because trade had a very heavy influence on culture and this type of stuff. So I'm excited to see that trade is going to be important for language as well. Markets also have a market language representing the lingua franca used between merchants, which is based on the dominant language of the burghers in the market capital. The higher the market power, the higher the contribution to the language power. And so you can try and establish yourself through language and for the spread of ideas, and ideas spread according to language. One of the reasons why, for example, a philosopher like Nietzsche didn't start becoming a lot more prolific until like the later half of the 20th century has to do with the fact that the original works are in German, and so if there's like no translation, the ideas can't really spread across that type of line. So just kind of exciting to see this type of stuff. Locations have a higher attraction towards markets that share their dominant language, and a slightly smaller boost if they only share the language family. And so this will be interesting, and also pull markets in a way that looks a little bit more organic and reasonable, kind of on like based on this language system. So you would expect to see a lot of the Arabic people in the same market with each other, rather than seeing Spain get split funny or Iberia split funny. Instead, it'll split along the language lines. And to be fair, also the cultural lines here. Court language. Every country also has a court language, which represents the primary vernacular used in formal proceedings of the government. For example, it might be the language spoken in parliament or written in legal documents. Unlike others, court languages can almost be changed at will. The possible languages are drawn from your primary and accepted cultures, your ruler, or your overlord country. The exact court language, this is an interesting kind of point, because you could probably up your language power by subjugating people and forcing them to use your language. The exact court language you have affects the satisfaction of the various estates. Nobles want you to have a more powerful language, while the peasants meanwhile want it to be a common language. The burghers will be happy if it is the same as the capital's market language. All like such a cool interlocking system on the basis of language. Obviously, we don't have much in the way of numbers in terms of how this is going to play out in terms of the player trying to play as strategically as possible, but it's very cool to see that there are like considerations in here. Clergy, of course, want everything to be in the liturgical language. Do they really, though? Do they really? Or are they better served when nobody speaks the language? Question. Most countries start with the same court language as their common language, but significant examples of where this is different in 1337 would include Norman French in England and Church Latin in Catholic theocracies. So we do see French, of course, being spoken. I wonder if it's going to be... So your nobles will like it if you stay on French if you're England, and this will be maybe a decision you can make. Your peasants would prefer a swap to English, The clergy would prefer you swap to Latin, although I think that being the interpreters of the language, I think, is something that the church cares about. I don't know if I like the clergy wanting it to be the liturgical language, but I don't know if I dislike it either. Anyways, culture group. A culture is a set of a culture group is a set of cultures that have banded together with some sort of shared identity towards each other. Culture groups are usually independent of language and current diplomacy, but rather represent more geographic or genealogical connection that is difficult to represent without abstraction. A good example of this would be the British culture group. The diverse cultures of Great Britain have 3 different languages across several different countries, and yet they are still united by their shared history and cultural influence that transcends the borders. So we see it here: English, Northumbrian, Scots, Welsh, Cornish, Highland, Norse Gael, and Anglo-Irish. In gameplay terms, culture groups give small opinion bonuses and make cultural acceptance a lot cheaper. This is nice. I wonder if you can affect culture groups. But also various pieces of content are gated behind culture group instead of culture. So maybe longbowmen as a unit or as a technology, or both, are only going to be available to the British culture group, which means you could get Irish longbowmen or English longbowmen in terms of tech, or would be available both. For example, your primary culture needs to be in the British culture group to be able to form the Great Britain tag. This, of course, makes sense. The game rules can also be set to prevent you from changing your primary culture to a different group. Game rules can also be set to prevent you from changing your primary culture to one in a different group. Interesting. I wonder why people would intentionally choose to self-limit. But rather than just not doing the thing, why you would want it to have a game be in the game rules? I guess to prevent the AI from going AWOL and like switching to like France and England, and everyone has like a heart attack. Okay, one change that we've made from EU4, which of course is not the previous game. This is not the successor of EU4, except it is, because this is Europa. Is the cultures can belong to multiple different culture groups, or if they are isolated, none at all. That is interesting. So Norse Gael uses Gaelic language. It is a Scottish dialect. It's in culture groups of Celtic, Scottish, British, and Scandinavian. Norse Gael is the most extreme of multiple culture groups, but the median will be closer to 1 or 2. That's all for now. But our talks on culture don't stop here. Next week, the artist, currently known as Johan, will make a song and dance about some deeper aspects of culture and brand new for Project Caesar, such as works of art and culture war. Super excited about this stuff. Definitely like when culture has a much bigger thing. And also excited that Johan will be back, because Johan wishes us a happy Wednesday. We didn't get a happy Wednesday today. Big sad. But that was it. I do think some interesting stuff is coming up with culture and language. We haven't really seen any numbers, but language is like such an important thing for like the development of countries and like the flow of history that is, generally speaking, I think kind of hard to abstract in a map game. And I think that, or it's generally not focused on relative to just like who has the bigger armies and like bam and like rah, like this type of stuff. And so I'm excited to be seeing there being like a significant treatment in terms of language, and also excited for next week, seeing some of the culture stuff. Generally speaking, this is kind of the type of stuff I would prefer to play for. In these types of games, playing for this type of thing is not really available in Victoria 3. Like, Victoria 3, you kind of just play for, like, GDP line, something like this would be very cool to be having in Victoria 3. But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please feel free to like, comment, subscribe, do the YouTube algorithm thing, and other than that, have a happy Wednesday.